Hey there people, welcome back. Gary Simmons here with lesson 57 in the Dead Earth game development series, brought to you by the Game Institute. In this lesson, we are going to add the final task that the player has to complete to our Creeper game, and that is the collection of the access code. The access code is not an object that we can see. It won't have a physical mesh in the world. It will just be a trigger with an interactive generic switch script on it. This will be placed at the location of one of the dead bodies so that when we move the crosshair over that dead body, it will identify on the HUD that this is the body that has the access code on it. When we then activate that access code, it will be like we have collected it from the dead body and we now have it in our inventory. Of course, we don't have an inventory, but what will really be happening behind the scenes is we will just be setting the access code state in our application's game state dictionary to true. So to understand how easy it's going to be to create an access code, let's create one right now with just a couple of steps. So I'm going to add a new game object to the world, and for now I'm going to create this as a sphere so that we can see it, but eventually we're going to remove the mesh and it will just be a trigger. So let me hold Control and Shift and snap it to the ground. Okay, something like that. I'm going to assign this to the interactive layer and I'm going to make its sphere collider a trigger. Next up, I'm going to add to it our interactive generic switch trigger. And here's another example of how generic our switch trigger is. We don't need to use hardly any of the properties via its inspector. We don't care about an activation delay or a deactivation delay, so we'll set those to 0. We will eventually need to put an activation sound in there, but I will leave that blank for now. And we don't wish this to be a toggleable object. Once we've collected the access code, it's like it disappears from the level. We have no material controllers, no animators, and no objects to activate and deactivate. All we wish to do is set a state when this switch is activated, and the state we wish to set is access code to true. As this interactive item has no required states, we can leave the state not set text blank. For the state set text, we wish to show the text which will be displayed on the HUD when the player has the crosshair over this trigger and it hasn't been activated yet. So we just want to say elevator access code. This looks a little bit big at the moment, so let me put the scale down to about 0.46. Yep, something like that. We also don't want to put any text in the object active text. This means that once the object has been activated, moving the crosshair over the dead body will no longer send any text to the HUD, so it will be as if we have collected the access code and it is no longer in the scene. Let me also rename this game object and call it access code. So next up, we need to identify the sound that we wish to play when this object is activated. So let's drill down into our sounds folder and into our player sounds subfolder. And you'll see there is a sound in there called digital pickup. And I called it digital pickup because I think this type of sound can be used all over the place for lots of other digital things, not just the picking up of the access code. So let's force this sound to mono. Let's set its compression format to PCM and let's click apply. And then we'll select our audio collections folder, and from the assets menu we'll choose to create a new audio collection, which I will call digital pickup. Like so. I want to set this to the player audio group, and I think I set the volume down to about 0.46. We want it to be quite a bold sound so that the player knows that something has happened, because that is really the only clue that the player gets other than the text disappearing from the HUD. This needs only one bank and only one clip in that bank, which of course, if I drill down into our player sounds folder, is our digital pickup sound. So let's now go back to our access code game object in the scene hierarchy, and let's assign it that new audio collection we've just created. So I'm going to drill down into my audio collections folder and drag over a reference to the digital pickup audio collection. Of course, our generic switch is also going to need to know what audio source it should use to play this digital pickup sound. So let's add an audio source to this game object. So from add component, I will choose to add a component of type audio source. I'm going to turn off play on awake. We don't want this to be a looping sound. I'll just set spatial blend up to 1 anyway. Although of course we know that our generic switch script will also take that value from the audio collection. And I think now we can just drag this audio source component and drop it in the audio source field of our generic switch. Okay, so I believe that this should work. So what I'm going to do, just to make sure that this is definitely working and setting the power state, is for now I'm going to select my application manager and I'm going to set power to true and set lockdown to false. so that when we enter the level, we already have power, we already have lockdown, and just finding the access code will allow us to activate the elevator. So let's see what happens. Okay, so let's first of all go up to the elevator and just check that it won't let us use it because we haven't yet got the access code. Let's now go and find the access code. Hey, there it is. Now imagine in the real game, there will not be a sphere mesh on it, so it will be invisible. And what we'll see here instead is just the dead body. So we'll walk up to the dead body, move the crosshair over it, and hey look, there's an access code. So what I want to do is pick that access code up, or at least simulate that. So you can see if I press the E key, the use button, we hear the sound, we activate the access code, and also imagine, of course, the sphere mesh is not there and this object is invisible. It will look like we have picked up the access code off of the dead body and it is no longer in the scene. So let's now go back to the elevator and see if we can now access the elevator keypad. Hey look, cool stuff indeed. So we've already created the access code. That was all that was involved, thanks to the fact that we have our super interactive generic switch. So let's now select our access code, get rid of the mesh renderer, get rid of the mesh filter, so it's now just an invisible object. And I want to prefab this. So I'm going to drill down into my prefabs folder and I'm going to drag the access code game object from our scene hierarchy into the prefabs folder, and we now have this access code. So now I'm going to delete it from the scene because we're going to instantiate the access code from its prefab at runtime so that it appears in a different location each time we press play. So like I said, I'm going to delete the access code game object from the scene hierarchy. It's now been safely saved into our prefab. And now what I need to do is I need to place some dead zombies into the scene. Now, rather annoyingly, we used to have a dead body in our scene that our zombies used to feed on, but somewhere along the line I deleted it, which means I'm going to have to set up a dead body prefab all over again with a food source on its neck. So let's drag a copy of Derek into the scene by going into our models folder, into our Mixamo subfolder, and dragging a copy of the Derek zombie into the scene. There he is. And I'm going to use Derek as our zombie, really just because we haven't got many zombies to play with, right? So if we had a really distinctive zombie, it would look silly that there were lots of them, but it doesn't look silly that there could be lots of policemen or security guards on the level. So I'm going to put him over here, something like that. And let me rotate him around a little bit, something like that. And next up, we need to assign it an animator that is going to animate it into the dead position. Now that's easy to do because we have created that animator already. If I go into the animator controllers folder, you can see we have this dead body animator, which really just goes straight into this dead body state, like that. Just a single frame state there, with the body frozen in a dead position. So this is the animator that we wish to assign to our Derek character. So let me select Derek and drag over the dead body animator into the controller field of its animator, and let me just press play and make sure that Derek does indeed go onto the ground in a dead position. Yep, looks good to me. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is we need to put a food source on its neck. So I'm going to drill down into Derek's hierarchy, into its hips, into its spine, open up spine 1, open up spine 2, and select the neck. And on the neck bone, I'm going to add a sphere collider. I'm going to make it a heck of a lot smaller than that, something like 0.16. And I'm going to assign it to the visual aggravator layer. I'm not going to assign this to all of its children. I just want it to be assigned to this game object. And I'm also going to tag it as AI food. I'm also going to set this sphere collider as a trigger. Okay, so this is now a fully functioning food source for our zombie. So I'm going to select Derek in the hierarchy and I'm going to rename this game object Security Guard. And then I'm going to prefab the Security Guard by selecting our prefabs folder, drilling down into the zombies subfolder. Actually, I'm going to rename this Dead Security Guard, right? Yeah. And then I will drag it into my prefabs/zombies folder. And now I want to create a few different instances of this. So I'll drag another body in here, and I'll rotate him around a little bit. And I've deliberately placed him in front of that rip in the fence because that rip in the fence is one of the really easy ways to complete Creeper, right? In fact, it's pretty hard if you don't use this rip in the fence. So it's going to be rather annoying that while we're trying to get through that rip in the fence, we're first going to have to get the zombies away from feeding on this dead body. Okay, and we'll create one more over here, all right? So once again, let's drag another copy of our Dead Security Guard into the scene. We'll rotate him around something like that. I want everything to have sort of random rotations. And I might push my first security guard just a little bit more over in the corner, like so. Okay, so we now have our 3 dead security guards in our level. What we're going to write next is a prefab spawner script. This is going to be a generic script that we can use to spawn prefabs at level startup. We're going to use it to spawn the access code randomly on one of our dead bodies. So let's drill down into our scripts folder, into our utility folder, and let's create a new C# script. And let's call this prefab spawner. Like so. Then let's open this puppy up in MonoDevelop and let's delete the start and update functions. We do not need them. Everything here will be done in the awake function because I want this spawning to happen quite early on during scene initialization. And you'll see in a minute that I also want it to happen before the first frame of any animations have played in our level, and that's because I want to spawn my prefab at the feet of my zombie. So if I go back to the level, you'll see what I mean, right? So when this zombie lies down, where his feet currently are is where the middle of his body will be. Let's just check that's the case. Yeah. And I want the access code to be spawned in the middle. So I'm going to give my prefab spawner script a list of transforms, which in its awake function, it will fetch the positions from and will randomly choose one of those positions to spawn the prefab, which in this particular case will be our access code. So in my list of transforms inside my prefab spawner, I'm going to assign either the left or right foot of our zombies. So the prefab will be spawned here, and then later on, when the update cycle begins, the zombies' feet will actually be over here somewhere. But of course, we've already spawned our prefab at that point. And the reason I'm not going to spawn it at the waist position is because at the moment, before the animations have run, the waist position is actually up in the air. So if you imagine this zombie was led down, the last thing I would want is my prefab hovering in midair here. I want the access code to be firmly down here where his feet are now, but not where his feet will be when the animations play and it's animated into its dead position. Okay, so hopefully I made that clear. So scripts don't really come much easier than this. We basically need to expose 2 properties that we need to fill out via the inspector. The first, of course, is the prefab that we wish this script to instantiate. And that's, of course, going to be our access code. So I declare a game object reference called prefab. It's serialized, of course, so that we can hook this up by dragging our access code prefab into this slot via the inspector. And like I said, we're also going to want to expose a place where we can list a series of transforms that this spawner can use to randomly select a position from. So I will create a list of type transform called spawn points. Once again serialized so that we can put as many transform references in here as we want via the inspector. So that's the inspector assigned variables. Let's now work on the awake function that's going to do the actual spawning. It's really simple. We just need to select a random transform from this list and then use Unity's instantiate function to instantiate the prefab at the position and the rotation stored in the transform. We'll create the awake function, and inside the awake function we will first check that we don't have an empty spawn points list and that we also have a valid reference to a game object in the prefab slot, and if we don't, there's nothing we can do, so we return. Failing that though, we wish to randomly select one of the transforms from our list of spawn points. So I will create a local variable of type transform called spawn point, and then I will access the spawn points array, and I want to randomize the index into this array, so I'll use Unity's random.range function, and we wish to generate an index between 0 and the number of transforms in our spawn points array, so spawn points.count. So at this point, we have now selected a random transform from our spawn points list. All we need to do now is instantiate our prefab game object. So the first parameter to the instantiate function is the game object that we would like to create a new instance of, and of course that is our prefab. As the second parameter, we need to pass in a world space position, so we will pass in the position of that spawn point that we just fetched from our list, and of course as the rotation, we will pass in the spawn point's rotation, and that is it. Every time this awake function is called, it will randomly select a transform from our spawn points list and instantiate our access code at that location. So let's save that off, go back and just check we haven't got any errors. And we haven't. So now we need to add our script to a game object. It doesn't matter what game object it's on. So as it's to do with scene management, I'm actually going to add it to my game scene manager game object. So I'm going to choose add component and I'm going to add our prefab spawner script. First thing we'll do is we'll hook up the prefab reference. So let's drill down into our prefabs folder, select our access code and drag and drop that in the prefab slot in our prefab spawner component. Now we need to fill out the spawn points list. We have 3 dead bodies, so we want to create 3 elements in this list, 3 potential positions that the access code can be spawned. I'm going to drag over a reference to one of its feet. I'll say the left feet. So let me lock the inspector so as I select each zombie, I don't lose the focus of the game scene manager game object. And I'll start with our first dead security guard here, and I will drill down into its left leg to find its left foot, and I'll take that left foot and I'll drop that in element 0 of our spawn points array. And then I'll do the same for zombie 1, which is this one here, right? Drill down, hips, left leg, left foot, drag that into slot 2. And then we'll go and find our third security guard here. Down into hips, down into left upper leg, down into left lower leg, and then drag its left foot over into element 2 of our prefab spawner. So now I'm going to press play and we're going to see where that access code gets spawned at. And it spawned on our first zombie. Okay, isn't that always the way? I really wanted it to be spawned somewhere else for the first test. Okay, let's try again. See if it gets spawned somewhere differently this time. Hey, look, no access code on that zombie this time. Let's see which zombie he's on. Is he on this zombie? Yes, he's on that zombie this time. Okay, so we have now created the access code puzzle for our game. That was all that was involved. So this has been a nice, easy lesson. Actually, let me just test that everything works now that we have the proper zombies in the scene. So I'm going to maximize the game view, walk over to the elevator pad. Hey, look, access code required. Let's go and find the access code off of one of our dead bodies. Please be on this one this time. I bet you this time it's placed on the furthest zombie. Yeah, there you go. Okay. Always the way. Hey. Access code collected. And we'll go back to the elevator. Here we are, and we are truly game developers. Okay, so before we finish up, let's select our application manager again and let's reset those initial states so that power is false and lockdown is true. And then we'll run this game again because we now have all of the tasks in place that the player must complete. And as you can see, we start off with no power, so let's go and activate the power. Then we now know, and of course we can do the access code in any order. So if we were to collect the access code here, once I found it, imagine how stressful it is trying to find this access code when you've got zombies that you have no guns to kill. All you can do is push them away. Okay, so at the moment we have the access code and we have the power on, but we haven't shut down lockdown. So we were able to do that in any order. So if we go back to the keypad, look, it's now saying that we can't, I don't know if you can see that, it's kind of a bit light around here. Let me turn the light off, yeah. It says under lockdown. So once we shut down lockdown, we should be able to leave the level because we've done the power generator, the lockdown, and the access code. Okay, so we've now completed all 3 tasks. We should be able to leave the level. Perfect. In the next lesson, I'm pretty sure that we are going to finish off our Creeper game. We're going to set all of the lighting, we're going to re-enable our zombies, and we're also going to tweak the damage that the player can do. Because in Creeper, when you press the mouse button, you can only push zombies away, so we don't want to do any serious damage to the zombies and allow you to kill them. We're also going to implement the taunt system. Basically, when we press the right mouse button, we're going to make a noise to distract the zombies from what they're doing. So, for example, if we have a zombie that is feeding in front of this rip in the fence here and we wish to lure the zombies away so we can get through that rip in the fence, we'll throw some insult at them to try and attract them to our position. We're also going to add a rotating skybox. We're going to tweak the lighting and get that finalized so it's much more dark and scary than it is now. And we're also going to download the post-processing stack and add some screen effects such as bloom to really make the level look a lot nicer. And we're going to create the title screen as well. So we're also going to see how we need to move the application manager and the audio manager, because they're don't destroy and load objects, into a bootstrapper scene, which will then load the title screen, and how the title screen will then load the game scene, and the game scene will go back to the title screen once we escape the level in this elevator. And hopefully we'll get all of that done in the next lesson, and we really will have created our first little game in this series. Thanks for listening, guys. I will see you next time. Bye bye now.